Stop, I'm in training. So, in the old days, some of us are going to remember, we had boards to just figure out how to spend our money on our programs. How much training and what kind of training and what was the maximum amount of training and, you know, what training providers could we send them to, which truck driving school, and, you know, it was just sort of, if you were on those boards, you just sort of looked at a budget and how much you wanted to spend on training and where you thought you could send people. And you were really focused just on the workforce development operations, the centers and the programs. And of course, you probably talked to businesses and were indirectly involved in workforce development. The outcome of what we did here ought to more globally build our workforce. And we thought that would probably be really good for the economy. Like if we're doing this stuff down here, this will be good for businesses, and this will be good for the economy. Well, if you build it, they will come, right? So in the new world, and we've done a lot of this under WIA, and we're going to do a lot more under WIOA, is what do we need to be doing for region-wide economic development? It's a big question. And more specifically, what do we have to be doing related to the workforce around economic development? Do we need people? Do we need jobs? Do we need our youth to stop moving away? Do we need better high school graduation rates? Do we need more ASL? What do we need in this economy related to human resources for this economy to be maximized, to be as productive and competitive as possible? Out of that discussion, what is the business and workforce development relationship in order to help the economy grow? What does business need, and what do we need on the workforce development side in order to be aligned with those economic development goals? And from that, therefore, how will we run our centers? And how will we run our programs? And what training will we invest in? And how will the training be delivered? So the alignment now is like this and needs to be more like this. Would you agree? It just makes sense, right? So we'll have a regional plan, we'll have local plans, and we'll have those plans inform us on our investments and our programs and our service deliveries. So in this world, I was working with a workforce board maybe 10 years ago in a mile-high city not to be named. And I looked at what they were spending their training money on, and I saw they gave, I don't know, $6,000 for someone to learn to be certified as a scuba diver. So I'm over here. I'm thinking, really? You need a lot of scuba divers here in the Mile High City? Well, $6,000 is a lot of money when you're talking about public funds. Would you agree? Okay, so the question for your board is, what are we going to spend our training dollars on? And are we going to send them to classes, or are we going to partner with employers and have employers teach them? Well, that's the dialogue, so that it comes down and is aligned with your vision and your plans. So let me do one more thing here. In this cycle, and when we got kind of caught in this cycle and in the transition, here's what happened. This didn't happen anywhere here in Illinois, and certainly not in Southern Illinois. But I've spent a lot of time with local boards, and they got caught in what I sort of thought of as a cycle. The cycle goes like this. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of policy. There's a lot of regulation. There's a lot of administration. And we have to have a board and run board meetings. And in that order in a lot of places. We value employers' time. We value it so much that we only have 4 meetings a year. And the meetings are really fast. They're, we're trying to get you out of here in 55 minutes because of how much we value your time. So the board members that are businesses are like this in a lot of meetings across the country. They have no idea what's going on. They don't have enough information to bring their expertise and their feedback and their input to the conversation because they don't even know what the conversation is about. They don't have context, they don't have training. So the business board members do their attendance requirements and their voting requirements. Well, more and more, the staff write the plan, enact the plan, deliver the services, put the packages together so the board can vote, act out on the vote that the board took, and the cycle became much more operationally organized and a lot less strategically delivered and designed. So part of the question and the ongoing challenge for board directors is how to get participation from the business members. What format, what do you need so that you can be an active member on this board? How much information? How much mentoring? How much in advance? So that you're actually making a valuable contribution. Most importantly, valuable for you as an individual. You see the benefits to either your individual company or your collection of companies, and you believe this work is helping the economy. Otherwise, you're going to sit on the board for about a year, and you say, Sue, I can't do this anymore. All right, so we don't want head bobblers on anybody. We don't want people sighing, oh man, there's a board meeting today. We don't want the public sector people who have to come, so they're always here, doing all the work without the economic developers, the business people, the organization, the organized labor, the educators in the room with you. In the room with you. So I challenge, I say things that a lot of board directors don't like. I mean, in my mind, if even a committee meeting is not a quorum of employers, you can't have a good committee meeting.
So I've been on a lot of nonprofit boards for the last 15 years or
Yes.
so. And what I find is that the head bobbling happens, there's always somebody who's getting ahead from it. That the reason it's set up that way is because we slammed our younger people in this meeting, but the baby boomers, we like to build bureaucracies. And we don't work by building bureaucracies and then not working them. And so so there's always the staff, and the staff is driving that, and somebody's getting ahead from that. And so it's not so easy, right? It's not so easy to break through that wall.
Right.
And when you are the business person, and I've done it a few times,
Right.
and there's generally blood,
Right.
when you go and take over a board that way.
Right.
I got one now that I just drove all the assholes out. And it's easy, but.
Well, how did you feel about those board members?
Yeah, well, if you got to go, you got to go, Well, I'm a businessman, it's easy for me.
He does know he said that out loud, I think.
I can't be fired.
Yes.
I think we see the obvious problem with that dynamic.
Yeah.
But isn't that also the model, the dynamic for corporate America, and indeed for the American political system? I mean, how is Congress or the board of directors of General Motors or Bank of America any different from what you just described?
Oh,
Except they're being compensated decently.
I'm not saying this problem isn't universal. I'm saying it doesn't have to be true for your board.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. And this is not for me about you showing up at meetings if you're a business. This is you talking about workforce development in your trade association meetings and asking those employers what their big problems are, what they think the solutions are, and bringing that back. It's not just meetings. It's really making sure the business voice is heard and is responded to in the workforce development system. I mean, I have boards that just do SurveyMonkey all the time. No, they just, I can't wait to a quarterly meeting to ask you which of these three problems are the biggest for you, because that's the next one we want to solve. The dynamics of the economy and the dynamics of the workforce are so vibrant right now that you have to have a lot more constant communication and a lot more ways to get input and feedback that's not just about board meetings. So one of the things Kathy and I were talking about, here's the other dynamic that I want to point out. So the workforce development system used to take a big pile of federal funds and send it out to the governors, and the governors figured out how to divvy it up, and they sent it out to the regions and the local areas, and it just went down every year, and we all learned how to do more and less, and Now, because of the dynamics of two things. One is the economy, and the second thing is because of the dynamics in Congress, it took them 15 years to pass legislation on the workforce. Okay, you remember what happened in 2008? In 5 quarters, we had the biggest recession ever, and it took us 5 years to recover, and we had no workforce legislation. So what the federal agencies are doing is they're giving less formula funds. If I've got this big pool of money, I'm going to give this to you to sustain the good work you're doing. But I'm going to keep all of this over here, and I'm going to ask you to write a grant to do what we think would be a good idea. So on the board, the dynamics have changed from regional and local plans, in a macro sense, guiding your strategies and guiding your vision and directing you toward. And then there's tons of opportunities that are task force, standing committee, 2 meetings for feedback. I mean, there's suddenly all this dynamic that can't happen in 4 quarterly meetings a year that we try to make really short so that we don't waste your time. I think we end up wasting your time because we haven't given you enough information and enough context to really make a valuable contribution. And that's the balance that you have an opportunity now with new boards and new board membership to really look at that and say, if I come to this meeting, I want to make a valuable contribution. If I'm a board member or a partner or organized labor or an educator, what do I need in order to be productive in this meeting? I need more information. Kathy, can you send me a white paper? I don't know this issue. Who can I get the background from? Right? I talked to a bunch of employers at the chamber, and here's what they said. Right? So that dynamic, it just starts to be more a vibrant role that you're on this board, as opposed to an attendance, voting, policies done. We think we can marshal on for a while now until, I don't know, another piece of legislation. So just be conscious of that dynamic. And figure out, if 6 months from now you're going, oh, this board's not going anywhere, make that an agenda item. How do we get back on track? How do we get more productive? How do we businesses stop showing up? Call them and say, what do we need to do to get you participating, not just coming to the meetings? Okay, any other questions or comments? I have a whole bunch of things. I think, let's see. You can't leave the board till you find a replacement. I just make these things up, but I think that's a pretty good guiding rule for workforce boards. I mean, you have a committee called board development. Your job's not just find board members. Your job is develop this board. Make this board productive. Make this board dynamic. Right? Let's focus on our organization called our board. Okay. All right, so let me just, again, talk about a little bit more context and ways you can be involved. Okay, so I'm moving beyond the functions and the roles articulated, and I'm moving beyond maybe just the quarterly meetings. And I'm talking about you thinking about how is it that I can be constantly scanning in my economy and in my region. And how can I be constantly scanning, not just my box, but again, a bigger foundation for that? How can I be reaching out? How can I be convening the right people? You know, this board needs a business member from X industry. We really need to get a board member that represents X county. We really need to get 2 economic developers on this board, not just 1. So all of those dynamics around convening the right 16 boxes are a role. Prioritizing, making sure that you ask, how important is this? And you have criteria for answering it. What's the scope? How many employers are affected by this? How many workers? How many counties? How many businesses? that you really get some good data to say, what is the scope and the impact? Is it chronic or is it episodic? So really spending time prioritizing and goal setting. Definitely aligning. I mean, I will tell you, so business members have said a bunch of things to me. One of them was, hey, you know, I'm on the Economic Development Board and I'm on the Workforce Development Board. And the agendas are the same. They go to 2 different meetings for the same agenda. No, I got an idea. No, that is part of this alignment. Is better making all of those systems work. And it's not because you sit in this room and you come to this meeting, but it's because you are out in the community. You're hearing about grant opportunities. You're hearing about employer issues. You're hearing about problems that really need to be solved. Facilitating, removing all the barriers that seem to prevent us from being productive, deploying resources, and definitely being evaluators. We need a lot more. One of the problems in government is we never know how to stop a program once we've started it. Maybe you just cut the funding, and it could be a fabulous program and it goes away. That's the most likely way that programs get ended. But I've been in workforce boards who are still focused on training nurses, and they have been for 10 years. And they don't want to stop funding the nursing training program, even though there's no longer a shortage of nurses. Right, so it's really making sure you're focused on evaluation. Every dollar is well spent, and every investment is well directed, and then you'll have a good board. All right, I think it's probably time for a break, yes? So how about 13 minutes on your watch? It'll be 10:25 on the clock in the back of the room. And your mark set go. How's everybody doing?
Great.
Are you having a good morning? Just one yes. Are you having a good morning?
Yes.
Anything I can do differently to make it more valuable to you? So far, so good?
All right.
Okay, so again, I want to just point out some of the resources that are embedded in this handout. So as the legislation and regulations were written, between slide 8 and 9 are kind of a list of functions, and I just gave it a comparison. So these were the functions under WIA, and none of them have been removed, and they've added some new functions for local boards. And they're primarily around, as I said, planning, alignment, and strategic work. So these 2 slides give you a little bit more of a detail. One of the things that I'd like to point out, especially in areas with a lot of rural counties, is one of the emphasis is going to be around technology, really bringing the electronic resources and the online resources to the workforce development community. So it's not about centers, not just about centers. It's really about access. And we have to raise our minds up to the question of access on the board, and not, how far do they have to drive to get clicks and breaks.
I'm sorry, I'm
Yes.
new, but so at the left, the WIA is the old model, and the WI.
So these are 2 pieces of legislation. The Workforce Investment Act, this is about 15 years old.
Okay.
Inside the legislation, there's a section that itemizes the functions of a local board. And so I've repeated them on the left-hand column. So people who have been on the board will see, what your functions have been repeated. And the other main point is they didn't take any of these functions away, and they've added some new functions. So in combination, these are all functions that have been assigned to local board. And the new ones, as I saw them, are on the right. Yes, Kathy?
I think one of the interesting things about the comparison is that we are really in control of a lot of those things that you've got there. Boards, our private sector, our partners, with the exception of, I would say, maximizing technology. We are in Illinois in a real challenge area where that comes from, because there has to be some agreement at the state level to utilize a shared technology. And those of us involved in systems in the state know that that does not exist. So to me, that's one of the hard ones because it's really dependent upon some state leadership and perhaps even some state dollars, so.
Right. And I think the other push to that conversation in terms of what you have and what you need,
Right.
and you know, whether or not we do it with 5 states as a region or just Illinois, I mean, the conversation does continue to get macro.
We probably need help. Being Illinois,
I do love, everywhere I go, there's only a few places it's true, but everywhere I go, people go, well, you're in Texas now, Melanie. Like, well, this is New York. I'm like, oh, hey, I didn't know. I mean, I do wake up some mornings and go,
which day?
I used to live in Illinois.
Woohoo!
The best thing I remember is my school, Immaculate Conception, was on Arthur Street, which is my last name.
Oh.
I was in 3rd grade, I'm like, yeah, Melanie Arthur.
With your little plaid uniform on.
In my little crisp uniform.
Yeah.
Yeah, my last name's Arthur, did you get that? I lived in Elmhurst, Illinois. And my father was climbing the 3M.
Oh.
Corporate ladder, yeah. And then we moved, of course, to the Twin Cities. Okay. All right, so starting to think again about current operations, new opportunities, new members, kind of getting answers to the question. I think in summary, my main point is the answer to the question is about my contributions is very dynamic. It's very dynamic. It sort of should partly be something you're pretty consistently thinking about. All right, what's going on with the workforce development? What do we need to be focused on? What is my contribution? So these are functions. There's some additional functions. There's a little bit around one of the new, again, trends in this legislation is they've gotten a lot more specific about the evaluation. So boards will be certified based on some pretty easy criteria the first time out, and then whatever criteria the governor and the state board adds. Centers will be certified. In my mind, boards that are really focusing on using this, not only a continuous improvement model, but sort of a milestone, measuring and marking accomplishments model. You would think I would say charter your boards, certify your centers, and credential the staff. And that you want a combination of those 3 to be tools and resources that you're working on in order really to formally raise the quality level that you can speak of. So we've done most of this, the comparison between the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act to the Workforce WIA
Investment and then innovation.
Right. So there's macro level system building stuff going on at the state and regional level. There's core program coordination. So really the sum total of the federal investment coming to the state, going out to regions and going out to local boards has to be coordinated. Lots of system building, and for me, I like to just give a quick analogy. So when I'm trying to explain, especially to staff or board members, so the system building is really a board function. And it's about, if you think of the analogy of FTD. So FTD is an organization with lots of florists. You're really in charge of the FTD. And each florist, most of them are mandatory members of the system, will have something in common to each other, core services, and they'll also have something unique. So it's really focusing on that system building. Again, the emphasis, skill-based training, skill building and credentialing, some target populations get really focused on. So the other major event here, and it's happening quickly, based on deadlines given to us by the United States Department of Education and Department of Labor, is this regional planning and development. And what I like about Illinois is they were conscious enough to say, you know, we don't have time to first write a state plan, and then pass it down for a regional plan, and then pass it down for a local plan. So the state is marshaling an effort to really sort of focus on unique regional planning requirements and to start building out the regional plans first. And then part of that will obviously be informed by what they're thinking at the state level. And then part of that regional planning will then also inform your local workforce investment area planning. And there's a lot more specifics that will go into your local plan than what go into the regional plan. But the regional plan is really about what do we need to do together to maximize our resources and make the whole regional economy thrive. So the local plans will be incorporated into the regional plan, and it will be submitted with local plan chapters or attachment arrangement. And these two will really inform each other in terms of having a state and regional planning process. And then this slide, I just wanted to point out, slide 14, this is a list of the core programs. So when I'm talking about alignment, and that being a board function, in relationship to the public workforce funds you have, all of the funds essentially coming in to these 6 programs, are now under the strategic planning and direction of the local board. It's a pretty big difference from where we were under WIA. With a fair amount of, obviously, state agency involvement as well for those. Okay, so there's a lot of detail here on how the plan documents in terms of content on the next few slides. I don't want to spend any time on it, but there is some, if you want to understand what that planning will encompass and how the regional plan and the local plan are the same or different, you can just take a little more detailed look at these slides. So I just want to say a few more things about sector strategies. I described them this morning. So clusters or sectors are when competing or complementary or independent firms come together because they do business with each other, they have common needs for talent, they share buyers, suppliers, processes, or technology, and they use the same set of skills or tap into the same knowledge base. So that's the general description of how sectors get formed. The goal is to invest in strategies that have the greatest potential for wealth creation. The return exceeds the investment. If I invest in this sector, it will much more significantly float the boat. It aids all components within a sector, so not just nurses, but nurses, teachers. It's a common response for the industry that's really good for everybody. And sectors are an emphasis. They're not meant to be exclusive. So when the board has 2 or 3 sector strategies, a healthcare sector strategy, a manufacturing sector strategy, and a retail sector strategy, it's for emphasis. It's not to exclude all of the other kinds of businesses and operations that are critical to your regional or local economy. So it's really looking at what's spurring economic growth in our region, which of these are rich in jobs, and then just formulating strategies right in the middle around those 2 primary contributing factors. Next couple of pages, so when we move more into sector strategies, what do we have here? We have something around manufacturing already to start, yes? We're participating in I think a national one. But there's a lot of criteria that you use to evaluate how to form and create a sector strategy, and that's on the next couple of pages. And they go beyond just workforce needs. They really tend to have a domino effect and be really good across other kinds of indicators, quality of life, the whole training and education system benefits from it. It's good for kind of the whole education stream. And when you do sector strategies, so if we're focused on manufacturing, hospitality or retail, and transportation and logistics, so if the board determines those are key sectors that we want to do strategies around it, I just wanted to show you an example of alignment. So I look within the sector, and I say, what are the biggest issues within that sector related to human resources? Human resources. In manufacturing, it tends to be a sector that youth don't want to go in. They don't want to work at the plant like their dad did, right? And so, and math, lots of manufacturing companies have tests for employment. The most likely failure for the trainees is the math test. The new hires need quick training to get productive and start up, and it's essentially on the job. And incumbent workers need to continue to grow their technical skills. So if these are the types of strategies that you can invest in, the board can invest in terms of workforce development. Recruitment strategies, pre-employment services, basic skills, soft skills, and hard skills. We can make investments in all of those. Customized training for incumbent workers and dislocated workers to transition back to the workforce. On-the-job training is a tool within on incumbent worker training for workers on the job so they don't lose their job. Then I just go along and I say, which are the issues and what strategy do they line with? So if we're having a pipeline problem in manufacturing, we've got jobs, then we can't get any applicants. I mean, maybe it's a monthly session in the high schools saying, don't you want to work with robots? It's not your father's plant anymore, or your mother's, right? So if this is the sector, and they're having a pipeline problem, this is how it can translate into actual operations, sort of practically, within the workforce system. Hospitality or retail, high turnover. High turnover, so how do we keep a steady supply of entry-level workers into the retail or the hospitality sector, and make sure that any employment event is a promotion or job to job. So we're not churning in that sector. We're actually creating something a little bit more like pathways. Most retail and hospitality sector jobs tend to hire youth with very little experience, and then they promote them to managers after a couple months on the job, right? You supervise your friends. Did that ever happen to you? You imagine a 21-year-old saying to another 21-year-old, "You were late." Well, you should have had that party last night. Well, if you think about it, a good incumbent worker training program might be how to become a supervisor. And think of how many businesses would value from that because they're in the sector. And it's an on-the-job training program where you and your training providers either come in and provide some training on the job, or they get released from work, come to a classroom, get some training, or you teach the employer the curriculum and they do the training. Lots of different models there. Was there a hand? Yes.
Yeah, did the new legislation get rid of that silly layoff aversion thing for incumbent worker training? Because if not, I think it's going to be useless again.
No, it did not get rid of it.
Layoff aversion?
Yeah, where about the only way that you can justify doing incumbent worker training, which I think is the best tool that is in the workforce legislation,
Yeah.
can only be tied to a company who tells you that they're going to close down if they don't do something different.
I think there's more criteria than just layoff aversion. And there's two models now. The incumbent worker training used to be a state program that you had to get permission for. And now it is also a local program. So that's maybe as a follow-up, we explore all of the work-based training options, all of the different ways now where we can take the training into the workplace for new hires or current workers, and that's what we mean by incumbent worker. That tends to be very government speak, right? So promotions as an outcome measure is one of the things they expect, which is not the same as layoff aversion.
Because in the model that they're really projecting that they want you to have, where they want you to build career pathways,
Yes.
you know, in prior days, you know, it wasn't a win for a local workforce provider to get somebody a job making minimum wage. But however, that's the start. But if you can follow up with incumbent worker training and continue that education,
Right.
then you can get them to that step where they need it and they're working the whole time. And that's a model that would work. But the rules that they tagged to the incumbent worker training, at least from the past, have made that impossible.
There's considerable more flexibility, and for me, a lot more opportunity. And for example, it's like I had a conversation in a board recently where finance was a pretty big sector, and the insurance companies and the banks and all the financial institutions were having a hard time finding for people with good math skills. And the HR lady from the bank said, "Well, I go to McDonald's to recruit my workers, and I go enough to find the best workers." So now you're seeing the employer create a career path, based on her knowledge of what kind of experience that individual will have as a cashier in McDonald's and watching them make change and count money and interact